"He's my successor," Dad said, handing Colton my father's ring. Mom nodded, and the room applauded like I wasn't breathing. My chair felt smaller. My name suddenly a coat I outgrew. "Mason will understand," Dad added, already turning toward congratulations and cameras. I swallowed, counted ceiling tiles, and chose silence over begging. The law firm's conference room smelled like ink and old promises. Colton hugged me, whispering, "You're free now," like exile was mercy. That's when I vowed to rise without ever raising my voice. I would rebuild my worth where applause couldn't be bought. He took my place, but not the peace meant for me. My name is Mason Hargrove, oldest son of Gerald Hargrove. We lived outside Columbus, near cornfields and a stubborn river. Dad built Hargrove Heating, sweating through winters to keep neighbors warm. Mom, Ruth, handled invoices, church bake sales, and family expectations gracefully. Colton was charming, quick with jokes, quicker with convenient forgetfulness. I learned furnaces, ductwork, and the language of hard mornings. We expected a transition plan, something fair, something true to sweat. Instead, papers appeared naming Colton president and me consultant without authority. "Family first," Dad said, which apparently meant second for the eldest. I kept breathing, because dignity needs oxygen more than applause. The announcement came during a barbecue behind the Union Hall Pavilion. Neighbors ate brisket while my future got carved on paper plates. Colton clinked a glass, thanked investors, promised expansion across 3 counties. He wore Dad's ring, which fit him like borrowed authority. A photographer asked for brothers together, 2 smiles and a caption. I stood there, holding air, learning how silence could weigh. "Say something," Mom said, touching my sleeve lightly, eyes pleading careful. "Congratulations," I said, and the word cracked like black ice. Colton's smile sharpened, thin as a knife hidden in dessert. I left early, counting steps, counting breaths, counting what remained mine. Next morning, my office key card flashed red at the door. My passwords died, my calendar emptied, my title shrank to consultant. Colton sent a message: transitional period, cooperation appreciated, compensation fair. I stared at those lines until the screen felt colder. He'd taken my seat, my ring, my place at Sunday prayers, but he couldn't take the part that worked without applause. I drove to a scrapyard where engines sleep like tired animals. Grease and rust no Trude's families sometimes refuse to acknowledge. I sat, watched cranes swing, and listened to my breathing. I decided my revenge would be usefulness, not noise or spectacle. That evening, Colton called, voice bright with victory polished for investors. He said we both win. Less pressure, more freedom for me. I let the silence breathe, heavy as a winter attic. "Dad trusts numbers," he added, "and numbers trust me now." "Then let numbers raise you," I said, not my obedience. There was breathing, shuffling, and pride learning its first bruise. "You're not family if you won't support this," he snapped. "Family isn't paperwork," I answered, then ended the call gently. The room stayed quiet, while my ribs learned a new shape. Silence hardened like steel cooling, dangerous and beautifully controlled today. I packed my toolbox, the old one with Dad's scratched initials. I left the company truck keys on the counter like bones. Mom watched from the doorway, eyes glossy, mouth practicing forgiveness someday. "I hope you understand," she whispered, practicing loyalty louder than truth. "I understand," I said, though understanding felt like swallowing river stones. I drove to a diner, ordered coffee, and counted options. A waitress named Claire slid pie over, said I looked exhausted. "You lose something?" she asked, and I smiled without answering. I lost my place, I thought, but not my purpose. Purpose tastes like coffee after heartbreak, bitter and clean inside. Night fell on Broad Street, and my truck became confession booth. I opened my notebook and wrote, "Prove worth without permission." No speeches, just work and patience longer than anyone expected. I would rent a garage, fix heaters, fix hearts, fix myself. I would build a life Colton couldn't manage or understand. I would keep family, even if family didn't keep me. Peace wouldn't be given, it would be welded by hours. I pressed my palm against the steering wheel like taking oath. "Rise quiet," I whispered. "Let truth catch up without help." Some vows are shouted, mine was forged in careful silence. I slept in the truck for 3 nights straight behind an auto shop. The January cold pressed through the windows like an unpaid debt. Each morning I'd start the engine just to remember sound meant living, My phone lit with messages from the company I no longer owned. Return the laptop. Submit invoices. Corporate requests, final documentation, all polite orders. Colton didn't call, didn't text, didn't look backward once. When your family replaces you, you stop expecting warmth from familiar walls. Coffee came from a gas station, meals from dollar menus, and silence. I told myself, fall quiet, but never fall apart. Sometimes the only thing you own is how you rise again. The fourth night, I used my last $20 for a motel room. The sheets smelled like bleach and loneliness, but at least it was heat. I stared at the cracked ceiling, replaying the moment Dad chose sides. Every version ended the same, with me nodding, pretending to agree gracefully. That memory burned like frostbite, slow but steady, eating through thought. I didn't hate him yet. Hate takes energy I didn't have left. I missed Mom's voice, missed normal dinners, missed my brother before ambition. The world outside the window hummed like machines that never stopped forgiving, and I wondered if peace existed for people stripped of their name. Then I remembered Claire's kind eyes and how she'd said, "You lose something?" The next morning, I returned to that diner, mostly for noise and warmth. Claire remembered me, poured coffee without asking, and slid another pie over. "You look like a man deciding between quitting and starting," she said. I smiled, half because she was right, half because it hurt less smiling. "Starting's cheaper," I said quietly, stirring cream into shaky hope. She told me her cousin owned storage units, one with a broken heater. "You fix it, he might let you stay free till spring," she offered. I nodded, took the number, and felt gratitude burn behind my eyes. Sometimes kindness finds you when pride finally stops standing guard. I left that diner carrying pie crumbs and a second chance. The storage unit was small, drafty, but dry, and it smelled like dust. I patched the heater using old wire and a prayer that held. It groaned back to life, spitting out warm air like forgiveness. I swept the floor, set up my toolbox, and called it home. Nights echoed with wind, but at least it was wind I earned. I ate canned soup, read old manuals, and planned my quiet rebuild. The sound of tools helped me forget my name didn't open doors anymore. I told myself maybe failure wasn't an ending, just a quieter classroom. Each morning I stood outside, watching sunrise touch the frost-tipped fields. Losing everything gave me time to learn who I actually was. Sometimes, late at night, I'd scroll through the company's posts online. Colton's smiling face showed up beside our father's old equipment. "Hargrove Heating expands," one caption said, pretending legacy hadn't bled out. People congratulated him, called him self-made, called him visionary, called him son. I wanted to hate him, but all I felt was pity wrapped in ache. Success earned through theft smells hollow, even from a screen. I closed my phone, stared at the dark, and whispered, "Keep it all." My peace wouldn't come from taking back a chair at his table. It would come from building a new one no one could steal. Revenge didn't need noise. It needed discipline, hammer, and grace. By March, I was fixing heaters around town for whoever needed cheap help. Word spread through neighbors faster than I expected, honest work talking loud. Claire handed out my number at the diner when pipes burst overnight. "He shows up on time," she told people, "and doesn't talk too much." That line turned into my brand. Quiet, reliable, patient as sunrise. The jobs were small, but the checks honest, and the nights warmer. I started saving again, one folded bill at a time, one breath steadier. Every customer who thanked me felt like a nail securing a new future. I wasn't rich, but I was finally clean of pretending to belong. Poverty with purpose beats wealth with shame every single time. One rainy morning, I got a call from a church down the road. Their old boiler failed, and the pastor said no one else could fix it soon. I worked for 2 days straight, hands shaking, knuckles bleeding from rust. When it roared back to life, he offered me a spare room upstairs. "You're a man of your word," he said, clapping my shoulder firmly. That sentence meant more than a paycheck or family blessing ever did. I accepted, moved in, and slept soundly for the first time in months. For once, silence didn't mean exile. It meant sanctuary earned the hard way. The world still didn't know my name, but peace finally whispered it right. In April, I passed my old house delivering a part to a customer nearby. The mailbox still read Hargrove, but the paint was starting to peel. I parked down the street, unseen, watching Colton step out in a suit. He looked tired, thinner, the way guilt wears a man from inside out. Mom waved from the porch, smile brittle like old porcelain plates. I sat there a moment, realizing I didn't want that life anymore. I'd traded comfort for freedom, applause for quiet honesty that built peace. Then I turned the truck around and drove back to the church. Sometimes leaving home isn't running away, it's returning to yourself instead. That night, I slept knowing rock bottom had already begun turning into ground. I woke before dawn and mapped a route across neighborhoods needing heat. The church basement smelled like old coffee and hymnals, familiar and kind. I built a toolbox cart from scrap wood and borrowed casters. It rolled poorly, but it kept my tools together and honest. I printed flyers at the library, black ink on cheap paper. Hargrove service, honest repairs, fair rates, I wrote, hands steady finally. I added my number, then underlined shows up twice without irony. The pastor nodded when I asked permission to post around town. Serve them well, he said, offering a blessing gentler than applause. I tucked the flyers beneath my jacket and stepped into cold morning. The first door was a duplex off Livingston, paint peeling like history. A woman let me in, pointing toward a wheezing wall unit sadly. I listened to the rattle, felt for heat, watched the coil. The fix was simple, a loose wire and a dirty filter. I showed her the part, photographed it, and replaced it carefully. You explained that better than most, she said, surprised by my patience. I charged less than others, then swept my own footprints quietly. That tiny job felt bigger than any boardroom applause ever felt. Outside, snow started drifting sideways, and my breath looked like smoke. I kept walking, leaving footprints toward the next cold home waiting. At a grocery bulletin board, I pinned 5 flyers beneath community notices. A man laughed beside me, reading the word honest with open doubt. You Hargrove? He asked, eyebrows raised like accusations wrapped in gossip. I nodded, meeting his stare without flinching, refusing the old shame. Heard, your brother's the real deal, he said, enjoying the sting. We both work, I answered, keeping my voice calm and even. He shrugged, walked away, leaving his laughter hanging like dirty laundry. I pressed another thumbtack, letting silence answer louder than my pride. Mockery lost power once I learned who could live without applause. I moved on, choosing streets where heaters coughed like tired men. By noon, my phone buzzed 3 times with small emergency calls. I hustled between apartments, climbed icy stairs, and earned new trust. Word of mouth moves like weather when your work respects people. I wrote invoices by hand, careful script, every digit neat and honest. I kept a ledger, counting not money, but faith slowly coming back. At the diner, I warmed my hands around a chipped mug. Claire slid a sandwich over and asked how the morning went. Better than yesterday, I said, which meant everything without extra words. Then keep doing exactly that, she replied, smiling like a true coach. I finished quickly, left cash, and returned to the cold streets. In the evening, I drove past the industrial park for parts. The supply counter clerk smirked when he saw my handwritten invoices. Old school, he said, ringing up igniters like small judgments. I asked about a vendor account. He shook his head slowly. Company policy favors established volume, he explained, enjoying the little power. Understood, I said, pocketing receipts like seeds for later days. Patience burns less fuel than anger, and it travels farther steadily. Outside, I loaded boxes, hands numb but mind strangely warm. I promised myself a vendor account when volume finally caught me. For now, I'd build credibility with punctuality and clean, truthful work. Back at the church, I organized parts into labeled bins carefully. I scrubbed my hands, watched oil curl away like yesterday's noise. The pastor stopped by with a thermos and a tired smile. How many homes warmed today? He asked, leaning against the doorway gently. Enough to sleep without thinking about tomorrow's doubt, I answered quietly. He nodded, the way men do when words risk saying too much. Keep your receipts and keep your dignity, he said, walking away slowly. I wrote that line under my ledger's heading, a promise worth keeping. Outside, the bell tower sighed as wind moved across the roof. I slept early, dreaming of thermostats clicking like small faithful victories. The next week, I bought magnetic signs for the truck doors. The letters weren't fancy, but they read clean from the curb. Drivers waved when they saw me parked near freezing houses. That ordinary respect tasted better than any champagne toast ever did. I made business cards at the print shop, thick and simple. Claire handed stacks to anyone shivering through breakfast at the diner. He shows up and he explains your bill, she told everyone. Those words worked like scaffolding, holding up the story where I needed. My schedule filled slow, then steadier, with calls from nearby streets. Each address became another board in my bridge back to myself. A landlord called about a building where children slept under extra blankets. 5 units wheezed, and 2 quit, stubborn as tired horses collapsing. I crawled through crawl spaces, fingers numb, flashlight flickering like uncertain faith. By midnight, 4 units hummed, and the hallway smelled like heat. I sat on the steps, drinking water, watching frost disappear from windows. The landlord offered cash and a long-term contract for maintenance. "You earned it," he said, signing papers on a paint-spattered clipboard. I shook his hand and felt something settle under my ribs. This wasn't luck, it was rhythm born from countless unglamorous hours. I drove home with the heater on, not ashamed of warmth. On Saturday, I returned to the parts counter with printed invoices. The clerk glanced over them, slower now, face losing its smirk. "We can open a small account," he said, tapping the keyboard. He slid forms toward me like a tiny surrender wrapped in policy. I filled boxes, checked part numbers, and kept my mouth quiet. Respect grows where consistency lives, not where speeches are given. When I left, the door chimes sounded like a softened bell. In the parking lot, I touched the truck magnet gently. The letters felt real now, not a hope taped on straight. I had started, and starting had already changed the shape of tomorrow. That afternoon, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number from uptown. A property manager spoke quickly, urgency beating beneath every careful word. "Our boiler's failing, and tenants are cold," she said, desperate and brisk. I grabbed my kit, prayed once, and drove through slush carefully. The basement was damp, the air thick with metallic worry. I traced lines, found the failing pump, and explained replacement costs gently. "Do it," she said, trusting a stranger because truth sounds simple. 2 hours later, heat climbed floors like forgiveness, finally remembering addresses. She signed a maintenance agreement without bargaining, eyes grateful and certain. I walked outside, feeling taller than the building behind me. Night settled early, and traffic shimmered across wet asphalt like veins. I parked by the river, turned off the engine, and listened. The water moved the way work moves, constant, patient, refusing applause. I thought about Colton's ring and Dad's eyes during that meeting. The ache softened, replaced by a steadier kind of breathing tonight. I hadn't reclaimed my old place, but I'd claimed a better one. "Peace isn't given, it's built," I whispered, watching headlights crawl past. The city hummed, and my calendar finally held tomorrow's appointments. I closed my eyes, thanking the quiet that taught me how. Then I drove back to the church, ready for whatever came next. Growth came like steady rain, soaking the ground without demanding applause. My calendar filled with repairs, maintenance routes, and promised follow-up visits. I saved every extra dollar, counting hope into a new toolbox. Claire teased me gently, dropping pie and contracts in equal measure. "You're busier than bankers," she joked, refilling my coffee without ceremony. "Busy keeps me honest," I said, and her smile answered kindly. I started dreaming about a workshop with warm lights and order. The church room worked, but clients needed a place to find me. I circled industrial listings, marking prices with pencil and prayer. Patience guided me, whispering, "Build slow or break yourself again." By summer, a small cinder block unit opened near the river bend. The rent felt heavy, but my resolve finally felt heavier. I signed the lease, painted walls, and set pegboards carefully. The first night, I stood alone, listening for doubt hiding. Only the refrigerator hummed, as if blessing my stubborn persistence. I stenciled Hargrove Service across the roll-up door by flashlight. Claire dropped by with coffee and a crooked potted fern. "Looks like a real business," she said, tapping the counter gently. "It's been real since the first heater clicked," I answered. We laughed softly, letting the room learn our new rhythm. I hired help when the calls outgrew my 2 hands quickly. His name was Tyler Reed, a calm 21 with grit. He showed early, stayed late, and asked questions without ego. "We explain invoices and never upsell fear," I said clearly. He nodded, absorbing rules like a man hungry for honor. We made uniforms, gray shirts stitched with our simple name. Customers noticed, tipping respect before cash, which mattered more now. Tyler drove the second truck once I trusted his steady instincts. Watching him pull away felt like clamping a joist perfectly. The structure of my life held because integrity was measured daily. Not every day tasted sweet. Some days bit like January wind. A supplier shipped faulty igniters, turning schedules into apologies and callbacks. I ate those costs quietly, then negotiated credit without anger. "You're stubbornly fair," the rep said, sending replacements overnight and discounts. Another week brought a roof leak that drowned the storeroom shelves. Tyler and I worked past midnight, saving parts with hairdryers. We slept on tarps, boots for pillows, laughing at exhaustion's strange theater. Morning sun warmed concrete, and the shop smelled like fresh starts. I patched the roof, then posted emergency numbers above the desk. Experience taught caution, but grit taught me to keep moving. Word about our reliability reached property managers across 3 neighborhoods. Olivia Brooks called first, voice quick, precise, and curiously respectful. "You actually pick up after 6, which I appreciate," she said. "Cole doesn't keep banker hours," I answered, smiling into the receiver. She sent us 12 buildings and paid on time, every invoice. Tyler learned scheduling while I handled inspections and delicate explanations. "You give people the truth, and they don't panic," Olivia said. "Fear sells fast. Trust lasts longer," I told her, meaning it. She nodded, the way professionals nod when values finally match. Our calendar turned from survival into a dependable living heartbeat. The shop became a place neighbors visited after long days. We kept a thermos on the counter and spare gloves. Claire sometimes parked out front, bringing muffins and small-town news. "Your brother's on a billboard near Westerville," she mentioned once. I felt the sting, brief, then watched it pass like weather. "We billboard with warm hallways," I said, and Tyler grinned. That evening, I swept sawdust while the radio murmured baseball softly. The simple sound stitched something torn inside my chest carefully. I realized home wasn't an address. It was steady, honest rhythm. My hands, once shaky, now measured comfort like a trusted scale. Colton's shadow still crossed my thoughts, but lighter than before. Clients sometimes mentioned his commercials, polished and full of promises. I kept working, letting our finished jobs handle any debate. A winter inspection failed at one of his newest retrofits. The city posted warnings, and rumor wheels started turning loudly. I neither celebrated nor frowned. I just restocked filters and couplers. "You never gloat," Tyler said, loading boxes into truck 2. "Gravity does that job," I said, closing the hatch gently. We drove to an elderly couple's home where heat sighed weakly. Their thanks felt louder than any billboard screaming along the interstate. Each month, I taught free Saturday workshops on furnace safety basics. The church lent chairs, and the shop donated coffee and donuts. Parents came with notepads, teens with curiosity, landlords with cautious eyes. I showed filters, igniters, and how to hear failing bearings. "Prevention costs less than panic," I told every group patiently. Olivia attended once, scribbling notes and asking precise questions. "You're building more than business," she said afterward, surprised and proud. "I'm rebuilding what noise tried to take," I answered simply. Her handshake felt like a contract with a better version of myself. The door closed behind her, and the shop glowed warmer somehow. By late fall, our trucks carried organized bins and practiced confidence. Tyler calibrated gauges by ear, and I trusted his judgment fully. We hired a bookkeeper part-time to tame the growing paperwork. I slept better, not from wealth, but from steady usefulness. Claire teased that I finally looked like a man belonging somewhere. "I always belonged to work," I said, not apologizing anymore. The sign above the door no longer felt like wishful ink. It read like a truth forged by scorch marks and patience. I walked the floor nightly, touching benches like blessings received. Every tool returned home, same as the man who used them. The turning point arrived on a Tuesday, masked as any other dispatch. Olivia called early, voice calm but carrying unusual weight behind careful words. "City Hall needs emergency heat restoration at the historic theater," she said. I swallowed, picturing grand plaster and fragile piping beneath aging aisles. "We'll assess today," I answered, already loading copper and threaded fittings. Tyler met me downtown, eyes bright with equal nerves and grit. The theater manager, Nora Lane, greeted us with a clipboard and urgency. "Opening night in 12 days, she said, breath quick, hands steady. I knelt by the boiler, listening like a doctor hears hearts. The pump coughed rhythmically, a dying metronome counting down reputations and trust. We traced the system, mapping loops behind velvet walls and tired brick. Nora watched quietly, understanding that silence helped concentration earn its keep. You can make the deadline, she asked, neither pleading nor doubting. With round-the-clock work and fair access, I said, meeting her gaze. She nodded, leaning into resolve shaped by seasons of strained budgets. Olivia arranged permits faster than I believed bureaucracy could move gracefully. Tyler fetched valves, while I wrote a schedule with minute precision. We divided shifts, posted safety notes, brewed coffee like courage in thermoses. I called Claire, who promised nightly food drops and occasional cheer. The city's chill pressed harder, but my focus burned warmer inside. Work began with slow victories, gaskets sealing, bearings humming progressively cleaner. We staged materials, labeled circuits, and logged every temperature rise carefully. Nora hovered without hovering, bringing questions that respected time and concentration. "Your team listens to the building," she said, surprising me with poetry. "Old places talk," I answered, smiling at her unexpected understanding. Reporters sniffed the story, curious about small business saving civic pride. I kept quotes short, letting our work handle the loud parts. Tyler replaced a corroded flange while I recalibrated the control board. At midnight, steam curled from vents like gentle ghosts returning home. We slept on folding chairs, trusting the theater to keep whispering truth. On day 5, a complication hit like ice water down spines. A main feed cracked behind decorative masonry, risking plaster and timelines. I closed the valve and felt old panic nibbling at edges. "We'll reroute above the arch and hide conduit inside molding," I said. Nora considered, then nodded, grit answering grit with practiced steadiness. Tyler measured twice, loyal to the rule that saved our mornings. We soldered joints carefully, sweat mixing with dust and warm tin. The system stabilized, pressure holding steady like a calming heartbeat. I updated the city inspector, who appreciated honest calls before surprises. Respect grows quickly when mistakes meet daylight without excuses. Or theatrics. The local paper ran a piece titled, "Quiet Crew Saves Landmark Theater." The photo caught Tyler laughing, me pointing at gauges like compass needles. Nora praised our transparency, Olivia praised schedules, and the city praised results. Claire taped the article in the diner window beside church notices. Customers waved when I stopped for coffee, pride carrying gentle responsibility. Later that afternoon, a voicemail arrived from designer Harper Lowell unexpectedly. She specialized in adaptive reuse projects across Columbus and neighboring counties. "I read about your work," she said, voice bright and decisive. "Let's meet about long-term collaboration after your opening night." Opportunity knocked softly, but its timing felt like thunder rolling close. Opening night landed cold and clear, the marquee blazing warm defiance. We tested the system hourly, proud guardians of unseen comfort and calm. Nora hugged Tyler, then me, with gratitude larger than the building's stage. "You gave this place lungs," she whispered, eyes reflecting bright lights. I stood in the balcony, listening to heat move like music. The audience never knew our sleepless week beneath their laughter tonight. That anonymity felt like the purest recognition a tradesman receives. Backstage, Olivia clapped my shoulder with a rare, unguarded smile. "You kept every promise," she said, simple words heavy with meaning. I drove home slowly, letting the city breathe around victorious quiet. The partnership with Harper formed over coffee in a sunlit studio. She spread blueprints across a table, plans for schools and libraries. "I need teams who honor buildings and people," she said steadily. "We explain invoices, teach safety, and answer phones after hours," I replied. She nodded, offering a contract that respected both time and dignity. Tyler read it with me, eyes widening at stable growth prospects. I signed, feeling the future click into place like precise threads. Meanwhile, whispers grew louder about Colton's latest retrofit inspections, failing statewide. Lawsuits circled, vendors balked, and commercials vanished from sudden quiet billboards. I didn't celebrate, but I slept deeper, trusting gravity to finish sermons. 2 weeks later, Harper introduced me at a regional builders' luncheon. My hands shook until I remembered the boiler's steady resurrection. I spoke about showing up, about patience, about telling truths gently. "We build heat," I said, "but mostly we build trust." Applause came clean, not loud, a respect that tastes like water. Afterward, city representatives discussed a multi-phase contract for municipal facilities. Olivia squeezed my elbow, whispering, "This is the next chapter arriving." I thought of Dad's ring, Colton's smile, and my truck nights. Peace hummed beneath the clatter of silverware and cautious optimism. I had found my place, forged without inheritance or borrowed applause. The reunion came, quietly, disguised as another family obligation dressed in politeness. Mom called one evening, her voice carrying hesitation and hope in equal measure. "Your father's 75th is next week," she said, careful not to ask directly. I paused, the wrench in my hand cooling with old memory. "He'd want both sons there," she added, guilt flickering through static distance. I hadn't stepped foot in that house for nearly 7 years. "I'll think about it," I said, because yes or no carried equal weight. When I hung up, the silence in the shop felt too alive. Tyler looked up from sorting fittings and simply nodded, understanding without words. "Sometimes peace demands walking through old doors," he said softly, not asking questions. The drive back to the house felt like rewinding a tape I'd outgrown. The fields were smaller now, or maybe my eyes saw wider truths. The driveway gravel still crunched the same way under tired tires. Mom met me outside, arms half open, unsure how to finish the motion. "You look good, Mason," she said, her smile holding both pride and shame. I kissed her cheek, smelling lavender and years of unspoken apologies. Inside, the air carried roast beef and the faint tension of rehearsal. Laughter came from the living room, familiar yet strangely hollow in rhythm. When I turned the corner, Colton stood there, older but not stronger. His smile faltered first, the moment honesty recognized consequence fully. He stepped forward, hands open, voice smaller than his frame remembered. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said, glancing toward Dad's empty chair. "I wasn't sure either," I answered, because truth deserved equal footing. The room filled with cousins, glasses, polite chatter, and invisible cracks. Dad sat at the table, older, frailer, eyes dimmed but observant. He motioned for me to sit, and for the first time I didn't resist. "Your brother tells me business is good," he said, tone careful and proud. "Both of you built something lasting after all," he added quietly. I nodded, choosing gratitude instead of revisiting the storm that built it. Some victories don't need recounting, they breathe better in still air. Dinner passed in slow currents, words floating like cautious leaves across silence. Mom told stories from our childhood, polishing them for peace's sake. Colton laughed where expected, his son copying each gesture with innocence. I watched quietly, realizing I didn't envy the chair I'd lost. My peace wasn't at that table, it lived in my work, my patience. Dad's fork clinked against his plate. He cleared his throat and spoke. "Mason, your brother's had some rough years lately," he said softly. "He's learning the hard way that shortcuts don't build legacies." I met Colton's eyes briefly and saw fatigue deeper than greed. "That's a lesson worth learning," I replied, voice calm as old timber. After dinner, Mom asked me to help with dishes like old times. The water ran hot, steam curling between quiet breaths and polite memory. "He regrets more than he'll ever admit," she whispered over the sink. I kept scrubbing, listening to plates knock softly like cautious apologies. "Do you?" I asked without bitterness, only honest curiosity testing the air. She hesitated, then said, "I regret believing comfort was the same as truth." That line settled between us, warm and heavy, and we both exhaled. From the doorway, Colton's reflection flickered, hesitant, holding 2 cups nervously. "Can we talk outside?" he asked, voice softer than any I remembered. I nodded once, drying my hands on the same towel from years ago. We walked to the porch, the air thick with approaching rain and ghosts. The swing creaked under our combined weight, rhythm awkward, then forgiving. "You built something beautiful, Mason," he said, looking down at his hands. "Something I could never build, even when I thought I'd won." I didn't answer right away. Silence works better when truth's nearby. "You had to lose everything to see what mattered," I said quietly. He nodded, swallowing hard, the porch light catching tears he didn't hide. "I thought taking your place would fill the hole inside me," he admitted. "But it only grew louder when I realized peace doesn't live in praise." I looked at him then, and for the first time I believed him. Rain started falling, soft and slow, like forgiveness practicing its first steps. He turned toward me, eyes red, voice trembling with memory and regret. "Dad's proud of you in ways he can't say anymore," he whispered. "I know," I said, "because some truths don't need confirmation to be real. I wanted to ruin you, and you just refused to fall apart." His words hung there, as fragile as they were freeing to hear. "Falling apart's easy," I said, "but building peace takes discipline." He nodded, wiping his face, then looked at me with quiet awe. "I wish I'd learned that sooner," he said almost to himself. I watched lightning flicker behind the barn and thought peace looked a lot like stillness. When I left that night, Mom hugged me tighter than before, unashamedly. Dad's eyes followed me from his chair, a faint smile tugging upward. You did good, son, he said softly, as though afraid pride might echo. Outside, gravel soaked in rain, headlights carving soft gold through wet air. Colton stood by the truck, hands in pockets, voice steady now. You ever need anything, I mean that, he said sincerely. I know, I replied, shaking his hand with finality and quiet understanding. No vengeance, no speeches, no drama, just closure in the rain's rhythm. As I drove off, the rearview mirror showed one house and two silhouettes. For the first time, I didn't feel replaced. I felt released. Guilt came quietly, not in arguments or storms, but in pauses between phone calls. Colton began visiting my shop some afternoons, always under the excuse of learning. He'd watch Tyler fix valves, asking questions he already knew the answers to. You always made this look easier than it was, he said once. I handed him a wrench, told him, it's never easy, just honest. He smiled faintly, wiping sweat though the room was cool. The rhythm between us grew easier. Not brothers yet, but no longer strangers. Sometimes he'd stay after closing, sweeping the floor just to stay useful. The silence wasn't awkward anymore. It was the sound of repair. Peace, it seemed, didn't erase guilt. It taught it how to work. One evening, he asked if I wanted to grab dinner across town. The same diner where Claire once slid pie across my lowest nights waited there. The lights were warmer, though, and I was no longer surviving. Claire recognized me instantly, her smile carrying years of quiet pride. Well, look who finally brought company, she teased, pouring coffee generously. Colton laughed softly, uncomfortable but trying, like a student learning forgiveness. She fed me when I couldn't afford to eat, I told him. He nodded, eyes lowering as truth bent his posture slightly. Guess we both owe people we never deserved, he said quietly. Everyone does, I answered, stirring sugar like a man stirring peace. For the first time, I believed guilt could kneel without losing dignity. After that night, Colton started helping at our Saturday safety workshops. Tyler welcomed him easily, introducing him as the quieter Hargrove brother. Colton taught furnace basics with humility, admitting his past mistakes openly. My brother rebuilt this business from ashes I left behind, he'd say. At first I cringed hearing it, but later I let the words stand. People forgave him faster than I expected, because honesty always disarms judgment. Watching him explain filters to old couples felt like seeing redemption in motion. You don't mind me saying that? He asked once after cleanup. If it's true, let it breathe, I said, wiping grease off my hands. Truth heals best when spoken softly, without fear of echoing too loud. A month later, Dad's health faltered, and the hospital filled with waiting hours. Colton and I sat side by side, taking turns with water cups. Mom dozed in the corner, her hands folded like prayer without words. Machines hummed, and silence turned holy between each careful breath. He talked about you, Colton said suddenly, voice breaking like thin ice. He said losing you was the mistake that taught him everything. I didn't answer because grief doesn't accept applause. It only absorbs it. I just nodded, eyes fixed on the steady light above Dad's bed. He said you found peace without asking anyone for permission, he added. That line burned into me like fire and comfort sharing the same skin. I reached over, touched Dad's arm and whispered, We're good now, old man. When he passed 2 days later, the world didn't roar. It sighed. The funeral was small, the eulogies brief, but the silences endless and kind. I spoke last, not about success, but about his stubborn faith and effort. He built warmth for strangers, I said, and taught us to fix what's broken. Mom cried softly. Colton stared at the ground. Tyler squeezed my shoulder once. Afterward, people came up thanking me for carrying the name with grace. I didn't feel proud. I just felt done pretending pain meant defeat. At the gravesite, Colton knelt longer than anyone, head bowed, shoulders shaking. When he finally stood, he looked at me like a man unburdened. He loved you more than he knew how to show, he whispered. Maybe that's where we both get it from, I said, managing a tired smile. Weeks rolled into quiet, steady rhythm again. Shop, church, late-night reflection. Mom visited more, bringing food, asking about Tyler's promotion and payroll. Colton handled the books now, careful, respectful, never crossing lines uninvited. "I finally understand why you stopped arguing," he said one afternoon. "Because peace talks louder than any defense ever could," I replied simply. He nodded, then said, "I spent years chasing approval you stopped needing." That sentence hung in the air, clear and honest, like a truce signed silently. "You were never fighting me," I said, "just the part of you hated." His eyes glistened, and he looked down, whispering, "And you were patient enough to wait." I smiled faintly, because forgiveness, I realized, wasn't mercy, it was understanding. Later that year, the city invited me to speak at a trade conference. They wanted a panel on ethical rebuilding after business failure and loss. I almost declined until Olivia convinced me it wasn't about ego this time. "It's about teaching others what silence can do right," she said. Standing at the podium, I saw faces full of ambition and fear. "Reputation can be stolen," I began, "but character can't if you protect it daily." People leaned in, some scribbling, others just nodding quietly with recognition. "The loudest revenge," I said, "is being so grounded no one can shake you." When I finished, applause filled the hall. Humble, human, deeply real. Somewhere in the back, Colton stood clapping, pride shining where guilt once lived. Driving home afterward, I thought about everything that had brought me here. Betrayal, humiliation, silence, and slow forgiveness stitched together like worn leather. I passed the old Hargrove house, now sold, paint peeling under streetlight. For the first time, it didn't hurt. It just looked like someone else's story. My story lived in laughter at the shop, in homes warmed by second chances. Colton's voice echoed from the radio voicemail he'd left that morning. "Thanks for letting me be your brother again," he said simply. I smiled in the dark, gripping the wheel with steady gratitude. Sometimes peace isn't loud. It's the sound of guilt learning grace. And sometimes the truest revenge is living so well no apology feels necessary. It's strange how peace grows in the quiet corners of your life. One day you wake up, and the ache that used to define you is just background noise. My mornings now start with the smell of coffee, the hum of the shop heater, and the sound of Tyler laughing in the office. Colton comes by early too, sometimes with his son in tow, the boy carrying small tools like they're treasures. Watching them work side by side feels like watching a film where time rewrites endings. The guilt between us never disappeared. It just turned into something softer, like shared humility. I look at him sometimes and remember the night he took my place, but instead of pain, I feel gratitude that life showed us who we truly were. Betrayal gave me peace the long way around, but it gave it completely, and peace, once earned, doesn't bow to bitterness anymore. On slow days, I drive to the river where I once slept in my truck. The same water moves there, steady, unbothered, a mirror that forgives without needing reason. I park on the same gravel patch, roll the window down, and let silence breathe. The cold air reminds me how far I've come without noise or permission. I used to think revenge meant winning. Now I know it means resting easy. Somewhere out there, the man I was that winter still sits alone. I imagine walking up to him, handing him a coffee and saying, "Keep quiet, you're going to be fine." I would tell him pain isn't punishment, it's a teacher that speaks slow. I'd tell him family can break you, but it can also remake you later. And I'd tell him that silence, the thing he feared most, would one day save him. Mom visits often now, carrying casseroles and old family photos like peace offerings. We talk about Dad, about how stubbornness ran through all of us like wiring. Sometimes she apologizes again, voice trembling like it's the first time. "I should have stood up for you," she says, tears catching on old regret. "You were scared too," I remind her, "and love makes cowards of us all." We sit together in the kitchen of my house, which smells like wood and coffee. The floorboards creak, honest and unashamed, like everything else I've built. "Your father would have been proud," she whispers every time before leaving. I never answer, but she knows I believe it now, because my silence has softened. That's what forgiveness does. It turns quiet into comfort instead of distance. One evening, Colton asked if I'd consider joining him for Sunday dinner. It had been years since the whole family sat at one table without tension. I hesitated, but his son's hopeful face made refusal impossible. When I arrived, the table was small, simple, and free of performance. Mom cooked too much, as usual, filling plates like she was mending years. Colton carved the roast, his hands steady, his voice calm. "To family," he said, raising a glass, and for once no words felt heavy. I looked around that table and realized the house didn't hold ghosts anymore. It held survivors, People who finally understood the cost of pretending. We ate quietly, laughter coming easy now, like we'd all been forgiven by the same long silence. It was the kind of peace you don't announce. You just live inside it. After dinner, Colton followed me outside while the crickets rehearsed summer songs. The night smelled like rain, and the air buzzed with fragile warmth. You ever wish things had gone differently? He asked suddenly, eyes down. I thought for a moment, watching lightning flash far beyond the trees. No, I said honestly, because if they had, neither of us would have grown. He nodded, jaw trembling, the weight of years balanced between breaths. I still don't forgive myself, he whispered, voice raw and cracked. Then start by living better, I told him, hand resting on his shoulder. Guilt keeps you still, peace keeps you moving. He nodded again, and for the first time I believed he'd finally heard it. Some truths don't need repeating, they just need time to take root. A few months later, we partnered on a new project for the city, two brothers running one company, something unimaginable a decade ago. People noticed our calm dynamic, the way we worked without competing. You two must never argue, a client said once, laughing lightly. We've already done all the fighting worth doing, I replied, smiling. When the ribbon-cutting ceremony came, cameras flashed and reporters circled questions. How does it feel to build a legacy together? One woman asked proudly. Colton looked at me, eyes full of history, then answered simply, It feels earned. I just nodded, letting his words carry the truth without my help. For once, the silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was beautiful. Sometimes I wonder if Dad watches all this somehow, shaking his head at irony. The son he doubted became the one who rebuilt the name with kindness. The son who stole learned to repair what he broke with patience. Life has a strange mercy. It gives you back what you lose in better form. The workshop hums most nights, light spilling through windows like soft proof. Tyler's running his own crew now, trained on honesty and grit. Claire retired from the diner but still sends holiday pies, handwritten notes folded inside. Told you broken men make the best builders, she wrote last Christmas. I smiled reading it, realizing she'd seen this ending before I ever could. Some people carry your redemption long before you've earned it. Now, when the day winds down, I sit outside the shop and listen. The river's hum reaches this far if the night is quiet enough. I think about everything I lost. Money, titles, a father's trust, a brother's love. And then I think about everything I gained. Peace, purpose, and a name rebuilt by grace. The scales finally balance, not through revenge, but through endurance. Maybe that's what life was trying to teach me from the start. We don't get to choose who betrays us, but we do choose what survives in us. And I chose silence, not to hide, but to heal. It became my armor, my language, and finally, my freedom. If this story moved you, please like and share. And tell me, should I forgive the brother who stole my place, or let silence stay my final answer forever?